Welcome to Film Chats podcast, conversations with Ottawa's film, TV, and media community presented by Digi60 Filmmakers Festival. I'm your host, Olivia Kierit-Clutterbuck. On today's episode, I'm talking with Lawrence Gunther, a blind environmentalist and activist. He is also a multi-hyphenate creative, working on podcasts, radio, TV, film, and documentary. He works both sides of the camera, and it was just really interesting to get his perspective on his experience as a blind creator. And it's something very unique that I think we can all learn from, and it'll make us all better creators. Enjoy. Thank you, Lawrence. Could you share a little bit about your background with us?
Hi, I'm Lawrence Gunther. I'm a blind filmmaker, TV personality, podcaster, writer, and lover of the outdoors. I've always loved the outdoors, and I grew up spending time in nature. Thanks to my parents, we had an old homestead, and it was an old farm building, and from 100 years ago, and just lots of trees and a pond, and spending time there as a child. I lost my eyesight. It was first detected when I was 8 years old. I was losing my central vision, and it had lost enough of the central vision that I was registered blind, but it didn't really stop me from doing what I love to do. In my early 20s, the lack of sight spread out, and I became functionally blind. I had to learn how to do things without looking. I still had some sight, but I called it my aesthetic vision. The candle light, the flame in the fire, the sunset, things of beauty I still appreciated with my eyes, but everything I did with alternative ways of doing things as someone without sight. And then in my 40s, it spread out even further, and I lost all my light perception. So that aesthetic side of my perception, that left too. And it was a bit of a mental health challenge, just learning how to give up that beauty of the sunset and what all that meant. I was really living in darkness in many ways, and how to reimagine beauty. I think all of that kept me really fascinated in how to use technology to tell stories. And there's compelling ways of telling these stories using technology that go beyond the written word or the spoken word. But again, to convey these stories and to convey this knowledge, you really need to give, and people expect a multi-sensory experience. And I really just feel that even though my eyes don't work, I can get these cameras to work. And with good people behind the cameras and good direction, they become my eyes, and they capture that visual information that I can't capture myself. But in a sense, they become an extension of me and help me convey these stories about nature and how we need to live in nature.
Awesome. Well, thank you and welcome, Lawrence. What first made you interested in documentary filmmaking?
I took a course. I was taking my master's in environmental studies at York University, and there was a course on multimedia. And I thought, well, this is good because, back then, I'm dating myself, but that was 1988, and the internet wasn't around yet. It was mainly TV, radio, and newspapers and magazines. And I couldn't read magazines and newspapers anymore. I couldn't see enough to read the print or see the pictures. And television was a pure audio experience. Going to the movies was the same thing. It became just an audio experience for me. So I was really into radio. But I was thinking, okay, if I'm just listening to radio and talking books, what am I missing? So I signed up for this course in multimedia. And I remember at the end of the first lecture, the professor confronted me in the hallway and said, how are you going to do this course? Because, there's going to be work where you're going to have to work with magazines and newspapers and write papers about this, essays about this. And I said, well, I said, I'm going to have to find a way around that. And she goes, well, you're not going to be able to do that work. You should probably just drop the course. And I said, look, I'm taking this course because understanding this is really important to me because I can't see how it all works. So I need to learn about this from a theoretical perspective, not from an experiential one. That's why I'm taking the course. And I never did drop the course, but it sort of fired up in me this, I think it was a bit of a passion that, okay, you can't tell me that I can't work in multimedia because I'm blind and I should walk away. It almost made me go in the other direction to just prove that I could do it.
That's awesome. So what was your first experience making a film, and how did it go? What did you learn?
There was a man in Toronto. He was legally blind as well, and he loved photography. And we were about the same age, and a mutual friend connected us and knew that I was interested in this type of thing and nature, and so he put the two of us together, and I became this blind photographer's sort of grip. It's a technical term for someone that helps out the person behind the camera. And we were talking 35 millimeter film here with, really good quality lenses and cameras. But this gentleman, he had some sort of eye condition that he had splotches of vision and splotches of areas where he couldn't see. And he was quite a gifted photographer. He had commercial shoots. He was shooting commercials for CP Rail, for beer companies, and I would help him on some of these film shoots, just working with light, working with exposure, with aperture, with shutter speed, with just getting that sort of the perfect sort of balance of all of these things. And it was a challenge. It could take days to get just that perfect shot, and without spending, it's not like digital now where you can just keep flicking away and there's no, you can just fill up an SD card. Back then, a 36 roll of film wasn't cheap, so you had to do it right. But I loved working with this man, and we were good friends for years. And to see the reaction of people to his work was amazing, and it really made me a believer that just because you don't have perfect sight doesn't mean you can't be amazing using these tools.
What can we as an industry do to help broaden diversity?
I think we should make sure we don't make assumptions. That we don't make assumptions about what people can or cannot do based on their abilities or disabilities. I think by doing so, we're just pushing people into corners. And when you push someone into the corner, they come out swinging. So by upsetting people, by making these stereotypes, by making these assumptions, we're not helping. We're just inflaming people to do things maybe in ways that they wouldn't actually do it. Why take a negative approach to something? Why not take a positive approach? Why not say to people, look, here's examples of people with disabilities that are doing amazing things in the creative field, and none of these examples make sense when you first think about it. But look what they've done with it, and just stretch people's minds, because we celebrate filmmakers all the time with these award shows, and it's always the same thing. Sighted, able-bodied person making great films, shorts, longs, features, documentaries, commercials, sitcoms, whatever. It's always the same thing, and perfectly healthy people making wonderful content. We never celebrate how people have taken different paths to make wonderful content and what that could look like. We need to celebrate that and explore that more.
I agree with that 100%. It's just like your media prof back in the day who said you shouldn't be doing this. And now look at you. Look at all you've accomplished. And it's all because one person told you no. I love it. It's also a great testament to your skill set as well, because you've made some really incredible documentaries. Like you said, you're a film, or you're a TV, radio, and podcast host. You've just explored so many avenues of the media industry. It's amazing. Nature is a common theme throughout your work, and I was wondering how nature and being outdoors inspires you.
I think nature needs a voice. Nature is powerful. Nature is going to be around a long time after the earth is finished with us humans. Nature is resilient. Nature is always shifting, adjusting to fit new realities. It never stands still. It never looks back. It just keeps moving ever slowly, ever forward, and altering and shifting and adjusting as it needs to. But because it happens so slowly and because it happens so quietly, we think it's stagnant. We think it's delicate. We think it can't be tinkered with. It can't be tampered with. It can't be impacted. It's fragile. It's not fragile. It's gonna win in the end. But we need to learn how to live with it and not try to dominate it, not try to treat it as some sort of infant, and protect it as if it was a newborn. It's none of these things. We're the newborns. We're the infants when it comes to nature. We just haven't learned how to acknowledge its force, its strength, and fit ourselves in there as the little tiny things that we are on this planet. Yeah, there's 7-8 billion of us now, and like ants, we're quickly turning this earth into a giant anthill. But we have to acknowledge the fact that we're on this earth, and it's this powerful force. Maybe at some point we could just destroy it all. It'll come back, I guess, but it looks like we're on that path. We're just not good at listening. We're not good at listening to what Earth is trying to tell us. And I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that through these storms, through these floods and fires and winds and earthquakes that we hear about and that are becoming more and more intense around the world, water shortages, droughts, heat waves, that we're starting to recognize that there is these powers being unleashed, that the balance, that the neutrality of these powers that we enjoyed and lived with, with abandonment, without recognizing that these powers exist, that period of time could be coming to an end if we're not careful, and put ourselves back into a sense of living within nature with humility, with humbleness, and learning how to get along with nature and not try to just push it around. I think that's what the story we need to tell. That's what we need to listen to. And as someone without sight, and as a traditional storyteller, because that's a gift that blind people have provided society and their communities for thousands of years, way before there was anything like TV or radio or even print. We counted on blind people to recall those stories that go back in time and to retell those stories in ways that are compelling, that are entertaining, that are informative. Not to lecture, not to teach, but to tell these ancient stories so that people will be reminded about the power of nature, about the power of time, and our role and our place within nature.
That's an awesome answer. And like you said, you've spent all your life in nature, so this is just a natural passion that came to you, I'm assuming. Would that be correct?
I spend way too much time in the city. Like everybody, the city is where you have the best chance of making a living, of meeting your needs, of experiencing things that are exciting, stimulating, lucrative, informative, and having community. It seems to be all happening in these urban environments. The other thing is, as someone with a disability, it's so tempting to use technology to compensate for my loss of sight. And I'm surrounded by technology, all sorts of technologies, from computers to GPS, to audio and visual recording equipment, to playback equipment, to ride shares, to systems that provide me with food and entertainment and housing. All of these things happen in the city. So for a lot of times, people with disabilities, they migrate to cities first for rehabilitation and accommodation, and then they don't go back. They don't go back to their rural and remote and northern communities, because back there, a lot of the things that they've come to depend on aren't there. They're not in those small communities. Those small communities don't have the resources to provide that kind of accommodation that many of us take for granted living in urban environments. So there's a lesson there too, I think, and I think we learned that with COVID, that living in cities isn't always the best thing. And you see now more and more people are moving out of the cities again and back into the country, and you know what, I can do everything I need to do without having to be in the city. So, in a sense, I love to be outside the city as much as I can, but I also know that being in the city is also where I need to be to get the accommodations I need to be the best person I can be.
So is there anything you wish filmmakers kept in mind to make film more accessible, whether that's as a viewer or as someone working in the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know what I like. What I like is when the story is being told and the sound effects in the story line up with the story, and the visual images are sort of somehow integrated into the storyline, into the narration where it's important. Nothing in film happens without a reason, and but I think there's a few things that are sort of happening in film, and sometimes it happens where you have a lot of audio effects and cinematography and not a lot of narration, and descriptive audio can help with that for sure. But it's sort of, I always find less descriptive audio is better. The less is better, because sometimes more is less with descriptive audio. Sometimes it's just way too much descriptive audio, and it's just way too much jibber jabber. It takes away from the experience. I like to have the real cinematography experience with the way the film was meant to be experienced. And if we can make that inclusive without incorporating a whole lot of accommodations to compensate for a lack of access because of the original design of the product, that's better. I mean, I'd rather have it just as a full product. Sometimes I'll watch a movie and I'll tell my family, I said, no, don't turn on the audio description. It cuts into the music. I lose all the music, and it just makes it sound way too clinical. I want to have that music. I want to experience that as well. And if I miss out a little bit on the visuals, who cares? I mean, it's not going to impact the storytelling necessarily. And if there is something significant happening visually, maybe my family will just let me know what it was that just happened. So, because it's important to the storytelling. But it would be cool if, when that's all done, and when I watch a movie and I don't need audio description, and at the end of the movie I had a powerful experience, taking that movie in, I'm really happy. If I have to always play with the headsets, especially in a movie theater where there's a lot of super loud sound effects, a lot of booms and bangs with these 5.1, Dolby, Sony surround sound systems, you're wearing your headset and you can't even hear what's in your headset. You have to constantly turn the volume up to hear the audio description, and then all that sound fades away, and then you're listening to actors whispering their lines, which is so popular these days, to whisper their lines instead of speaking like a real play, or it's just seems popular now. Then you have to turn the descriptive audio headset down, and so I'm always playing with the headset up and down volume, and it's a little annoying. It takes away from the experience of the movie itself. I think we just need to get better at making content that's fully accessible. And I think about like a good stage play, where they had very few props those are fully accessible. You don't need to, have a description of a stage play when, these traditional stage plays, because they're really just fully accessible storytelling. And some of the older TV shows, the same thing. You didn't need to have audio description. I never grew up with that, but we've become reliant on it now. And I think we've let producers off the hook in terms of how they, produce their content to make it fully accessible just from the get-go.
Yeah, that's a really good point about just making it more accessible for people and not relying so much on the assistive technology to do the job. That's something you did a lot in What Lies Below, I noticed, where you weren't focusing on your blindness, but there were times where you were showing us how you see the world differently or how you feel it differently, like when you were at the museum in Fort McMurray and you were feeling, what the oil or the tar actually feels like instead of just seeing it, right? But that wasn't the focus. It was just a part of it.
Yeah, where they separate the oil from the sand in that experiment, and this is an experiment they do 10 times a day to visitors of that tar sands interpretation center. And so you put in the bitrium, you add hot water, you stir it, and then you've got sand, and then oil is floating on the top and water in between, and that's the extraction process. And then I smelled it, and the smell coming off the top of that glass was just almost knocked me over. And that's something you didn't see. That's something the camera and the spectators don't see. But that was the main thing for me, was the smell. And then when I went and stood on the side of these tailing ponds, where the wind was coming across the tailing ponds and hitting me in the face, and having to breathe that air, that's another side of that story that never gets told. We have all sorts of great photography of those massive, massive tailing ponds in the tar sands in Alberta, and their funny color and their size, and it's impressive for sure. But then to smell it, and you think, oh my goodness, there's a whole nother aspect of these tailing ponds that hardly anyone talks about. And there is a smell. There's smells, chemicals coming off there in the form of gas that get drifted and moved around. And you wonder, well, what's that doing? What are the impacts are coming from that? And no one talks about that. But to me, that was what I got from that. And that was how I interpreted and explained that story.
Yeah, and that was something I had never thought of, was the smell, until you had brought it up in the documentary. So for collaboration, do you have certain people you work with all the time, or are you constantly trying new directors, new production people?
There's some film crews that I work with, and an executive producer that I work with a lot, and he tells, when he assigns a director or directors of photography or sound to one of my projects, he just lets them know, Lawrence knows what he's doing, just follow his lead. And when your boss, the word comes from top, you follow what this guy is going to tell you to do. He's the producer, and a director and a creator, and not just the person in front of the camera. When your boss tells you that, you sort of show up ready to do that. And if you're not ready to do that, then you got to leave. Mm-hmm. And so that's helpful. But when sometimes people approach me and they want to, and I get this a lot, where a director is very successful and a film producer, and they want to film something with me and maybe capitalize on my popularity that I've worked on, or whatever, that some sort of brand recognition that I've developed over the years, and they want to leverage that into a project of their own. To quite often I find that they approach me as if I'm like a puppy, or just something to include in their film, and I'm just gonna wag my tail.
Oh, like you're a show dog. My goodness.
Yeah. You know what? Look, I'm not sort of gone beyond that, right? Like I'm not just the subject or the talent, and so maybe I'm a little bit difficult to work with now. Having been the boss, it's hard to go back to being just the employee, right? But I think too, there's that idea of, as a person with a disability, I'm a bit of a charity case, and I'm easy to push around, and I'm a blind person. Come, blind man, sit here blind man, stand here, here blind man, drink this water. You get a lot of that as a person with a disability. You get treated like a child, right? Because you're seen as a needy child, almost like a baby that needs to be fed and watered and put to bed and washed and dressed and groomed and all of that, and so people look. It's not. They don't mean to be disrespectful. No one disrespects a baby, but they certainly don't listen to the baby who says, okay, now you got to do this and do that. It's like a child, right? You tell children all the time, no. and I think people quite often look at people with disabilities like, I told you no, like, how dare you ask again when I've told you no already? And people get pissed off at people with disabilities who try to, make their presence felt and their views known and their opinions count. And you need to have a tough skin to just say, F you, you're going to listen to me, or one of us is leaving. Because if you're just going to let yourself get pushed around and think, well, at least I'm in a camera, in front of a camera, I'm going to get some recognition, I'm going to get some screen time out of this, so I'll just be the passive, person who does what they're told, and even though this is about me, or I'm not going to rock the boat, and I tried. You gotta exert yourself, because what you're bringing to the production is something they probably don't even know. They don't even understand. They've never dealt with it before. They've never experienced it before. You're talking about, as a person with a disability, a different way of producing, and it's not taught in schools. It's not something people experience necessarily that often or at all. So they don't know how to deal with that. So you need to be able to make them listen, ask them nicely, explain. And if they're still not getting it, you need to be able to ask them. You need to be able to impose yourself a little bit, right? So that they're listening to you, so that they're going to take your knowledge, your experience into account and incorporate that into their own production values. Otherwise, you're just going to get bowled over, and it's not going to happen. And it's just going to be another, look at this person with a disability, aren't they amazing kind of thing.
Very good points brought up. Before I go on to my next question, I just want to remind viewers that when you see a guide dog or service dog, you do not pet them, and you more or less just pretend they aren't there. You speak directly to the human, not the dog, no petting. It distracts them from their work. And just have courtesy. Now on to the actual question, because it's about our making of a guide dog. What made you decide that would be a good series? Just journeying, assisting with the training, and being matched with your current guide dog.
I've been using guide dogs for 37 years, right? For a long time. A lot of different guide dogs over that time. Guide dogs, they're trained all sort of the same way, to do the same sort of tasks. And most of it is urban centered. Sidewalk, street crossing, escalators, elevators, countertops, indoors, in and out, revolving doors, blah, 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 right? All city stuff. I take my guide dogs and I say, that's great, thank you, I can get around the city. That's all good. These are important things to know and do. But then I take these dogs into the country, into the outdoors, on a path, on a dock, on a frozen lake, in a canoe, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, tobogganing, I do tons of stuff in the outdoors, and I have to teach these dogs how to do this stuff with me. And it's, the dogs love to have fun. Okay, but this isn't necessarily free time for the dog to run. You're still sort of, we're in the outdoors together, so you still have to sort of guide me, but it might not involve the harness. It might not involve, a sidewalk. So now there's other things we need to teach the dog how to do, and I teach these dogs how to do this. So when I approached the CNIB, and they were a brand new guide dog training organization, just getting started, and I had this conversation with the president of the CNIB, John Rafferty, who I've known for quite a few years, and I was talking to him about this, and he said, wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I said, why don't you let me work with your trainers that you're just hiring and train them on how to train the guide dogs to do the things that I train them how to do after I get the guide dogs. That way, other people like me who want to have outdoor lifestyles, who live in maybe more rural environments or northern or remote environments, not in urban areas, but want to have a guide dog, that you can train them to have guide dogs as well, so that it's not just the typical urban guide dog, but it can be a real Canadian guide dog, right?
Yeah.
So he loved the idea. So we, the whole time we were filming this with the guide dog trainers, and these are trainers, like there was two of them with 35 years of combined guide dog experience, and all they kept saying is, Lawrence, we've never done this before. Like, oh, we've never, and sometimes and we would film it, and they'd call me the next day and say, Lawrence, we need to film that again because we never thought about this at all, and now we look, we have some ideas. And I'd have to get the film crew back, and we'd have to film the whole thing over again. Only now they'd bring some new, ideas to the project, and I'd say, okay, let's do this, because my job wasn't to make them look foolish or stupid. My job was to demonstrate that you can train guide dogs to do more than just sidewalks, and if they had ideas on how to take it to the next level, well, why not capture that instead of just half the job? Let's capture the whole thing. And so there were some challenges, but they never had big egos. There was one guide dog trainer, and I won't mention any names, but there was one guide dog trainer, and we couldn't use their footage in the end because they refused to let the footage, and it was brilliant footage. But in the end they said no. They didn't want to be part of it. And so we had to take it out, and that's fine. But I asked another guide dog trainer once about what happened, and they said, Lawrence, there's a joke. And I was like, oh, they said the difference between God and a guide dog trainer, and the difference is God doesn't think they're a guide dog trainer. But there's this... Because, when you go to get a guide dog, the trainer is God, right? They're teaching you they not only train the dog, but then they train you how to use the dog. And it's like they're training you how to walk and talk and feed yourself like a child, right? So in a sense, they're like a parent. They're really teaching you the basic skills of how to get around. And they're teaching you breaking your bad habits and teaching you how to do things. So there was, I tested the limit on a few guide dog trainers in terms of, but most of them were fine with that. Most of them were fine. And in the end, it was a lot of fun. But, and in the end, the other thing we had a challenge with was I wanted at the end, we had 8 dogs to start with, and I needed a new guide dog. And after we brought these dogs through the 6-7 months of training, and they were all starting to be certified as guide dogs at the end of their training, I wanted to pick one out to be my guide dog. And I had permission to do that from the president. But then the manager of the guide dog program said to me, Lawrence, no one gets to pick their own guide dog. That's just a disaster. We can't give that impression that you're going to pick your own guide dog at the end of all this, because then people will come to the school and they'll think they get to pick their own guide dog. And, people, it's like that, rebound date, right? When you break up from a relationship and you have that rebound relationship right afterwards, you think it's the best one ever, and then you realize afterwards, oh no, that was just a rebound. And people have that with guide dogs. They lose their guide dog, they meet a new guide dog, and they think it's going to be the best one, and it's just the worst fit possible. But it's the next one in their relationship, so they think it's it's filling this huge void in their life. So allowing blind people to pick their next guide dog isn't always the best thing because it's way too emotional. It's not built on reality. And so I said, okay, I said, you pick the guide dog, but don't tell me. Don't tell me which dog it is until the end. And so that was the deal we made. And we would, as we were filming this over the 6-7 months, I would go, oh man, I love that dog, and they go, oh man, I like that, and then something would happen, and the dog would be disqualified, and I, oh, so it was almost like Survivor, right? In Survivor, that TV show, where the top dog on the island or whatever always gets knocked off and kicked off, and it's always the one that comes in second that ends up winning the competition in the end. Well, that was my guide dog. He always came in second, and he became my guide dog because he was just consistently fine in every test. He was consistently fine. He never failed any of them. He never beat anyone at any of them in terms of the other guide dogs, but he was just really good all the time. Good enough, and he became my guide dog. So it was the logical best choice at the end. But man, there was a few other dogs I wish I had got, but I loved them all for sure.
That's awesome. I also really appreciated, it wasn't a huge thing that was brought up in that documentary, but how you did show that these dogs do have time off to play and just be a dog. They aren't working 24/7, which is very important, I think, for people to know.
Yeah. People see me over the years, and I'm known by a lot of people as having the worst behaved guide dogs in the world. And it's because I let my guide dogs be dogs when they're not working, right? I let them do their dogginess and express their dogginess when they're not being guide dogs. And I'm not afraid of that. I know how to get my guide dog back into guide dogging, right? To get their head back into the game when they need to be back into the game. That's not easy to do because dogs love to play. They love to be lazy. They love to have fun. They love to explore. And so if you can't, say to the dog and get the dog and say, okay, time to work, and press on the dog that it's time to work now, then you're going to have a hard time. I can do it. I don't think, and I'm not afraid to take on that challenge, but it's not something everyone can do. I'm big too, so I need a big dog, and so when I have a big dog and he's looking a little goofy when he's not working, people just say, "Oh my God, Lawrence, your dog is just so badly behaved." Yeah, he's just being a dog.
They deserve that time. They work hard.
Yeah.
Is there anything that makes you hopeful for greater diversity and representation in the industry in the future?
The film industry? I think, like we saw in Hollywood, this big push in the last 5 years or so, not the Me Too push, and that was super important for sure, but the push to have women recognized as producers, as directors, right? And I always think, in terms of disability rights, we're 20 years behind women. So I was a little sad to know that it's only in the last 5 years or so that women were starting to be recognized as film creators and producers and directors. And I thought, oh, shoot, that means people with disabilities have 20 more years to wait, before it's our turn to get recognized and get there. And now we see, people of color and the BIPOC, and that whole need to recognize the value they bring to film creation, and that's just happening now, right? So women first, then BIPOC, and then but it's always people with disabilities. And I guess it's because out of all the different equity groups and diversity groups, there's only one that's really gets a lot of charity, and that's disability. So when you have people with disabilities who are helping charities to raise money by exploiting their needs or their vulnerabilities, and when you have a society that's based on servicing the needs of people with disabilities through charities, it's always putting those people with disabilities as needy, as less fortunate. So to take someone that you grow up perceiving as less fortunate and needy, and then putting them in positions of power as filmmakers, that's a big jump up in status, right? So it's not easy to do that. I think that's why people with disabilities are always seem to be the last to be achieve equality in different fora in the workplace, and now in film creation. We're not there yet, but we will get there if we stand up for ourselves and we make ourselves and impose ourselves into this production. We will get there.
Yeah, definitely. One, just with disability, I realize it's not blindness, but recently the film Coda, which I believe Marlee Matlin, a deaf actress, was a producer on. I could be wrong though. They just won a couple big awards for Coda, including a Best Supporting Actor for the first male deaf actor as well. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So there is hope for us.
I know, eh?
There is hope.
It's starting. Yeah, it's starting. I agree.
Yeah, we'll get there. It's just one step at a time. Do you have any tips for aspiring or established filmmakers?
You mean people with disabilities who want to do this?
Yeah, or just in general.
I guess just in general, I think the best thing is you need to learn all aspects of film production. You know, everything from scripting to producing to directing to set to audio to video to editing to folio. You need to know that just the filming aspect is just the first quarter of the production. There's a whole lot of stuff that happens after that. You need to be aware of all of those components and how much time and energy is involved in the production of film. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to ever become a helpful or a team player. You need to understand all of these pieces and how it all fits together, and the timing and the resource requirements and the skill sets that people bring to this, because there's so many different skill sets that are involved. To do it all yourself, it's there's people who are filming and editing their own films, and that's all great. But everyone will tell you the editing takes way longer than the filming, and just getting to the right set and getting that right, everything set up properly, that takes a lot longer than the filming does as well. So, understanding all of that is so important, how those pieces work and the technologies that are involved and the skill sets that people bring. To respect that, that's so important, right? We want to be respected as people with disabilities just as much as the editor, sound editor, the video editor, all of those people should be respected as well, because they're all bringing amazing skill sets to the production. So know your strength. Don't avoid it. Don't pretend your disability isn't there. You don't need to focus on the disability. Just understand how you can take your disability and make it into a strength, something interesting, a different way of approaching the storytelling. I'm just saying that as people with disabilities who create in movie and film, it doesn't just have to be about disability. There's a billion other stories out there that we should be allowed to tell that have nothing to do with disability. But at the same time, you can't just pretend your disability doesn't exist or hide it. You need to take the strength that your disability brings to the production, because it's another way of seeing. It's another way of looking. It's another way of perceiving the story. And by understanding that this is maybe another perspective could be helpful. It could be different. It could be, interesting, but it could also get people to look at something in a new light, in a new way. That's what I'm trying to do. And I think I'm pretty good at it, but it's a way of storytelling.
100%. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. So thank you, Lawrence. Do you have any projects or anything you want to plug before we sign off?
No, we're still working on some what I call the Lake to Plate series, and this is interesting. I'll just mention, like, it's always fun to be in front of the camera, but I'm just one guy's voice. And I said, here we are, we're going to different regions, and we're looking at the people who produce food, who forage food, who produce beverages, who have tourism operations based around nature. All these things that are happening outside the cities by entrepreneurs, by indigenous persons, by naturalists, by all these people with different skill sets that are involving food and connecting with nature in sustainable production and bringing that all together. So that's our Lake to Plate series. But and I've been filming these and been in front of the camera and meeting these people and greeting these people, but now I realize we need more diversity. So I've stepped back, and we're bringing in other people to take on that role. Women, people of color, indigenous people, youth, to take on that role as me. And I've put myself into the backseat as just doing voiceover. So I do the voiceover. But you know what? In the name of diversity, in the name of just giving a more representative accuracy of what is really taking place in real life, it was important for me to step away from the front of the camera and go behind the camera in the production to make it's more real. It's more real. It's not just about me.
That's amazing. And a great opportunity for the people who are taking your place in front of the camera too. So well, thank you, Lawrence, for being here with us today and answering all our questions.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my talk with filmmaker Lawrence Gunther. A huge shout out to our festival partner, the Digital Arts Resource Center, for sponsoring this series. For more information about the festival, visit digi60.org. And don't forget to engage with us on Facebook at Digi60, on Twitter at Digi60Fest, and on Instagram at Digi.60 to help us keep the conversation going. I'm your host, Olivia Kier-Clutterbuck, and I'll chat with you again soon.